Good evening, good morning. Hello, everyone who's joining us from around the world. I know we have a very diverse set of geographies represented here in this evening in New York. So thank you for joining us. My name is Melissa Lott, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Tonight, we're going to be discussing how hydrogen can provide commercial energy services across key sectors, including power, transportation, industry, and buildings. Let me quickly say that this event is being webcast live and the full video will be available in the coming days. So if you want to rewatch the discussion this evening, don't worry, you will have the chance. And for those of you who are joining us via Zoom, you can submit a question for the panelists at any time by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And during this discussion, we'll start with some remarks, but then we will save plenty of time for Q&A. So please do submit your questions so we can make sure to get in as many as possible. I'm really pleased to be joined this evening by just an all-star lineup of folks to have this discussion. I'm included in the lineup for this evening. I will briefly introduce them, but I'll leave you to read their extensive bios. We've got a real deep bench of experience here this evening. The first is Benedict Chia, who's the Strategic Issues Director at the National Climate Change Secretariat, the Prime Minister's office in Singapore. We also have Dr. Julio Friedman, who's a senior research scholar and lead of the Carbon Management Research Initiative here at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. We are also joined by the Honorable Juan Carlos Jobet, who's the Minister of Energy and Mining in Chile. And we will be joined by a video by Senator Charles Schumer, who's the US Senate Majority Leader from New York. We will also be joined in our panel this evening by Dr. Fiona Simon, the CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council. And then Nobuo Tanaka. Tanaka-san is the chair of the steering committee for the Innovation for a Cool Earth Forum and also special advisor for the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And he's the former executive director of my also former place of employment, the International Energy Agency in Paris, where he served from 2007 to 2011. We're also joined by Alex Zapantis, who's the general manager of commercial for the Global CCS Institute. And then again, I'll be joining us this evening as our moderator. So we're going to begin this evening's great discussion with some pre-recorded remarks from Senator Charles Schumer, who is the senior senator from the state of New York and also the US Senate Majority Leader. So we'll transition to that now.
Hi, everyone. This is Senator Chuck Schumer, and I'm thrilled to join with all of you and with one of the greatest institutions of higher learning in the world, Columbia University, as we mark the start of their New Path initiative. We all know this is a time of profound challenge and great opportunity. And as we work to defeat COVID-19, we have a choice between going back to the way things were before, business as usual, or laying a foundation to grow our economy and tackle the biggest challenges of our time. And perhaps the biggest challenge is climate change and the fight for environmental justice. This is deeply personal for me. I want my grandson to live in a world where he can enjoy the beauty of our planet and not suffer the consequences of past generations. It's also about social justice. Underserved communities that have borne the brunt of fossil fuel pollution for decades, dirtying their homes, their air, their water. We all need to work together. The environmental justice movement and all the communities who've been hit by the worst by climate change and pollution. We all must have a seat at the table and have a voice as we tackle this existential threat. So as Majority Leader, I'm committed to working every day towards the policies that promote clean, renewable energy. I'll work to ensure zero-emission vehicles are affordable for everyone, like my Clean Cars for America proposal, as well as policies that address the hardest sectors to decarbonize. And of course, it's my dream that one day soon, we can make New York the hydrogen hub of America and create new, good-paying jobs right here in our state. That's why all of your work is so important. Hydrogen has always held promise as a powerful tool for tackling those hardest to decarbonize sectors and create jobs for our economy. But year after year, we failed to put the necessary resources to expand this technology and take a bold step towards fighting climate change. By starting with this administration, we will be full steam ahead to push for policies to bring down the costs of technology like carbon, especially through the President's new American Jobs Plan. There's no shortage of opportunity in New York. I was proud to announce that Plug Power is building their new gigafactory for hydrogen fuel cell manufacturing in Rochester, a project I worked with them to secure last year. And I'm now pushing the Department of Energy to invest in separate Plug Power hydrogen fuel cell manufacturing at the Stamp Industrial Site in Western New York. I promise I'll stand with all of you to create more opportunities to bring further investment in hydrogen to New York, and in initiatives like this one with Columbia, which will be essential to help make the innovations and policies we need to make it happen. So thank you for caring about jobs, innovation, and our environment. I can't think of a more worthy cause to pursue.
I can thank Senator Charles Schumer and his office for preparing those remarks to kick us off tonight. And now I'm really delighted to introduce Minister Juan Carlos Jobet, Minister of Energy and Mining for Chile, who will be delivering our keynote address this evening. Minister Jobet, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you for the Center for organizing this event and for allowing me to present what we're doing from Chile on this front. I'm going to share a brief presentation with you. I hope you can all see that well. So basically, you know this very well, and Senator Schumer summarized it brilliantly. This is the biggest threat we have to our existence and also to the well-being and the quality of life of future generations. So I think it is important to understand that hydrogen, it's a key lever we need to move to make sure we are able to stop climate change on time. I've been following this discussion for several years already, and I'm very optimistic today, given the changes we've seen in the international scenario. The commitment of the US is very important. The leadership that President Biden and his administration is showing on this front, I think it's essential. The commitments announced by other countries, including China, Japan, the Republic of South Korea, are very important as well. We already have around a quarter of the global greenhouse gas emissions that are already paying carbon taxes or are subject to some type of trading system to basically internalize the externalities that fossil fuels generate. We, as a small and developing country, are doing our part. We committed ourselves to be carbon neutral by 2050, as the Paris Agreement says we should do. We are phasing out all our coal capacity by 2040, and we are developing our renewable potential very, very quickly. We have historically depended on fossil fuels, imported fossil fuels, a source of more than 70% of our energy consumption. But that is changing very quickly. This year only, we will start operation of over 6 gigawatts of projects of renewable electricity, right? That is basically 25% of our current installed capacity in our grid, right? So we're moving very, very quickly. We're going to have 70% renewable grid by 2030 and almost 100% renewable electricity by 2050. And then basically, and this is the essence of our plan, we're going to use that clean and cheap electricity to then replace fossil fuels across our economy with electricity, in transportation, with electromobility, in industries, in heating at our homes, offices, and so on, right? But that plan has one missing link, which is how do we reduce emissions in some sectors that are very hard to abate, very hard to electrify, right, and to reduce emissions. And there's where green hydrogen would play an essential role. This slide basically shows an estimate of McKinsey & Company. They estimate that by 2050, between 7 and 24% of final global energy demand will be supplied by green hydrogen, especially in ground transportation, shipping, aviation, and some industries, including steel production, feedstock for refineries, and others that are very hard, as I said, to electrify, right? So without green hydrogen, and this is the main point, we will not be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions enough, right? So what we're doing basically is we've been following this discussion, and we launched last year our own green hydrogen strategy. But let me show you these numbers. McKinsey, that is our advisor on this, have been following the announcements on electrolyzer projects that are being developed in different countries. And what this graph shows is, if you look at the first color here, the lighter blue, it shows that in December 2019, there were around 13 gigawatts of projects under development to be in operation by 2030. 6 months later, that number had went up to almost 28 gigawatts, and last December, it had went up to almost 44 gigawatts, right? So in a year, the capacity of electrolyzers that have been announced by different countries and different companies had basically more than tripled, right? And this is very important because as we increase the installed capacity of electrolyzers, we're going to be able to reduce the cost of producing green hydrogen, which is, as most people agree, the main barrier to use it massively. Why Chile? Because we have basically, I would say, the best renewable resources on the planet, right? And this is something that it's not only myself that says this, but McKinsey and other international sources confirm the same thing. If you look at solar PV, our capacity factor is around 37% in the north, in the Atacama Desert, which compares very well with other countries. And on wind capacity factors can be over 70% onshore. That is pretty impressive. And it's not only the quality of our resources, but also its quantity. We have the capacity to develop over 1,800 gigawatts of capacity to produce green electricity. That is 70 times the size of our grid today, right? So we will be able to use these resources at home, but also through green hydrogen and its derivatives, we will be able to export these green resources to the world. And that is the essence of our strategy. If you look at the numbers, McKinsey estimates that we will be able to produce green hydrogen at below $1.5 per kilogram by 2030. And they are, by the way, updating these numbers, and they think we will be reaching those targets even sooner, right? And these costs, we expect that are going to be so low that they will more than compensate the relative disadvantage we have because we are a distant country, right? So we will be able to compete in international markets given our very low of production. In our strategy, we set ourselves very ambitious goals. They are summarized on that slide, but we want to be the cheapest green hydrogen producer in the world by 2030. We want to be one of the top 3 global exporters. We are working to have 5 gigawatts of projects under development by 2025. We already have, by the way, around 40 projects at different stages of development. And we think we're going to have basically 2 main spots where we'll be producing and exporting green hydrogen from: the north, the Atacama Desert, and the stream south in Patagonia. And that is very important because from both locations, we have very open shipping routes to reach the international markets. And just to finish, we are doing a lot of work to ramp up our key industries domestically, to build international coalitions. We have the natural resources. We have a very sophisticated electricity market. We have very deep and sophisticated, again, financial market, but we need international cooperation. We will not be able to grow up this industry without international partners that act as off-takers of the hydrogen and its derivatives, that provide the engineering and the technology, that basically take responsibility for building and operating the project. So this is basically an area in which we bring a lot to the table, but we need international cooperation to make this happen. So I'm very happy to have the chance to present what we're doing briefly in this webinar, and to open a dialogue with all the participants to see how we can cooperate and clarify any questions that that might arise. So thank you so much, and I hope we can have a discussion later on.
Thank you, Minister Jobet. I really appreciate your comments. I especially appreciate how you opened your comments around the essential role of leadership in this, especially as we're in the run up to Glasgow. It's wonderful to hear that, and it is certainly an important part of this mix. Also appreciated your highlighting the needs to find solutions. It was great, and speaking about what Chile is looking at, not only to develop and decarbonize its own economy, but to contribute to the worldwide, the global decarbonization of the economy. So thank you for all of those comments, very much appreciate them. I'm now very pleased to introduce Dr. Julio Friedman and Alex Apantis to deliver our presentation this evening. So Julio and Alex, I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, Minister, for your extraordinary and excellent opening comments. Always delighted to hear from you, and thank you so much. It's also always a delight to be joined with Alex. We are presenting new results, some of which have actually been published recently. Some of them will be coming shortly, and we will shortly put the joint website for our program together, which is on circular carbon economy. This report is focused, or this presentation is focused on what we see as opportunities and limits to hydrogen and what is most important to do between now and 2030. This is part of an ongoing project. That project is, in fact, to assess the opportunities and limits associated with a transition to a more resilient and sustainable energy system that addresses climate change, increases access to energy, and sparks innovation for a thriving global economy. It seems pretty clear that the next 10 years will be decisive. And in point of fact, to hit a 1.5 degree target, we have to get 50% reductions in the next 10 years. That is on the order of 30 gigatons of abatement. It is well beyond what we need with Paris. It's extremely hard, and we got to move far and fast together. In this context, we believe that hydrogen will be an important component of a circular carbon economy. That focuses on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, say through efficiency or conservation, or substitution of fossil fuels with renewable power. The reuse of CO2 for things like as a working fluid or in enhanced oil recovery, conversion of CO2 to new products, be they concrete, fertilizer, or fuels, and then removing CO2 either from the air and oceans or from existing sources. In each of these areas, hydrogen actually can play a very important role, and we're delighted to share a bit about what we have found in our studies. Just some basics, the way we make hydrogen today looks like this. In goes fossil fuel and water, out comes carbon dioxide and hydrogen. Today, most everywhere in the world, that this carbon dioxide goes into the air and oceans. It doesn't have to be that way. If you capture that carbon dioxide and store it in deep geological formations, that is sometimes referred to as blue hydrogen, and you can have very low carbon hydrogen that way. There's a completely different way of making hydrogen, like Minister Jobet referred to, green hydrogen, in which zero carbon electricity goes in, either from variable renewable resources like solar and wind, or from hydropower, or even nuclear power, and then what comes out is hydrogen on the other side. One last way of doing this is actually with biomass feedstocks. Here I want you to think mostly about things like municipal solid waste or agricultural wastes. Here in goes biomass and water, out comes CO2 and hydrogen. Even if that goes into the air, you can have quite a low carbon footprint. If it goes, it can, however, be captured and stored underground, in which case the biohydrogen actually removes greenhouse gases in the process of formation. These different forms of production have very different footprints associated with this. If you're using a carbonaceous feedstock, biomass or coal or gas, the footprints can vary a lot. This is vertical axis here is in kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen. So think you make a ton of hydrogen, how much CO2 comes out? In this case, for steam methane reforming, it's about 10 tons of carbon dioxide. For coal, it's more like 22 or 23. However, if you capture that CO2 and do blue hydrogen, you're really more like 1 or 2 kilograms of CO2. You can have very deep abatement this way, 80 or 90%. If you make hydrogen with electrolysis and you just pull that power off the grid, the footprint is actually quite bad. In most markets, it actually is equal to or even exceeds the emissions associated with coal production. However, if you use 100% renewable electricity or zero carbon electricity, it's effectively zero. It's very, very low. That is also the case if you use biomass wastes. If you don't have carbon capture, it's very low or even slightly negative. With carbon capture, though, you can remove as much carbon dioxide as coal-fired gasification would emit without carbon capture. This makes it attractive for a number of potential opportunities. The life cycle emissions of hydrogen fundamentally are a function of what happens in the inputs. That does include the upstream emissions from natural gas and things like that, the inputs for the electricity, and whether or not you are combining that with carbon capture and storage. Generally speaking, we have a high level of technical readiness for these technologies. These are commercially available today, blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, both PEM, proton exchange membranes, and alkali electrolyzers. Even biomass gasification is quite mature. That said, there are a lot of technologies that are on their way. There is a great potential to reduce cost through innovation. There is a great potential to add new pathways to production into that. This means that actually innovation policy is every bit as important as other policies in getting these technologies to market. Speaking of getting them to market, they have to be shipped. Minister Jobet mentioned the fact that to get from Chile to a place like Japan is complicated and difficult. One can send it as liquid hydrogen. However, it looks like it will be cheaper and easier to do that with some other fuel. For example, converting hydrogen into ammonia or combining hydrogen with carbon dioxide to make zero carbon methanol. Those are much easier to transport, are much more commercially competitive. That's not where the story ends, though. You should think about the zero carbon fuels, hydrogen, ammonia, and zero carbon methanol, not just as combustion fuels, but also used in a fuel cell. Fuel cells provide a handful of important advantages. One of them is they're immediately more efficient than most internal combustion engines, commonly twice as convenient. It is also the case that because you are not burning anything, you get many important health and environmental benefits. For example, no sulfur, no NOx emissions, and no particulate emissions. That is because you're not burning anything in the process of creating energy and electricity. With that, I am happy to share the screen with Alex, who will discuss the findings they have on their newest report on blue hydrogen.
Well, thanks very much for that excellent scene setting and introduction, Julio. So let's get straight into it. Clean hydrogen, of course, can be used across a broad range of industries and applications, displacing fossil fuels. So that's its value. It can be used from industrial processes as a source of heat or as a reductant. It can be used in fuel cells or in gas turbines to produce electricity to power vehicles or power grids. It really is, as Julio likes to say, the Swiss Army knife of decarbonisation. In fact, the Hydrogen Council estimates that demand for hydrogen could be as high as 530 million tonnes per year by 2050. And if that were the case, it could deliver up to 6 billion tonnes of abatement in that year alone. Of course, this estimate is subject to many assumptions about the demand for clean hydrogen and the energy sources that the hydrogen would displace. However, it illustrates the potential of clean hydrogen to support multi-gigaton scale abatement across the global economy. So that is the size of the prize that we're chasing with clean hydrogen. Next slide, please, Julio. It's useful to consider where we are now, where we need to get to by 2050. So today, around 120 million tonnes of hydrogen is produced each year. About 98% of that hydrogen is produced from coal or gas. The remaining 2% approximately is produced by electrolysis, and most of that is a byproduct of chlorine and caustic soda production. About 0.3% of hydrogen is produced using renewable energy powered electrolyzers, and only about 0.4% of hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage. So in round numbers, about 99% of hydrogen produced today is actually emissions intense, contributing around about 830 million tonnes per annum of carbon dioxide emissions to the atmosphere. So what this means is we need to increase the production of clean hydrogen from less than 1 million tonnes per year today to around 500 million tonnes per year in less than 30 years. So rapid scale up of production of clean hydrogen is absolutely critical to delivering this abatement opportunity. And of course, this rapid scale up in production capacity must also be met by an equally rapid ramp up in demand for clean hydrogen. So price is also a critical factor, but more on that later. Next slide, please, Julio. So blue hydrogen is well positioned to kickstart that rapid scale up because it's available, it's mature, it's been operating at large scale literally for decades. As shown in this table, there are 7 operating commercial hydrogen production plants with carbon capture and storage, and another one in construction. There's probably more actually. The Enid fertilizer plant, for example, has been producing hydrogen with carbon capture and storage since 1982. And these are large scale facilities with the capacity to produce, between 100 and 1,300 tons of hydrogen per day each. So large scale clean hydrogen production with CCS is very well established from an engineering and technical perspective. Fortunately, renewable hydrogen production is also advancing, but off a much smaller base. The world's largest renewable hydrogen plant is in Fukushima, Japan. It has 10 megawatts of electrolyzers powered by 20 megawatts of solar PV. And if it had sufficient battery storage to store the excess power produced by the array for later use by the electrolyzers, it would have the capacity to produce a bit more than 2 tons of clean hydrogen per day. Of course, new and larger renewable hydrogen projects are emerging. There's 2 very significant examples listed here, the NEOM project in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Asian Renewable Hub project in Australia's remote northwest. Both of these projects enjoy excellent wind and solar resources and access to large areas of land at very low cost. They're both very exciting projects. And later in the presentation, Julio will talk in more detail about renewable hydrogen production opportunities. Next slide, please, Julio. So I mentioned previously that the cost of production of clean hydrogen was critical to ensure that's competitive with conventional alternatives so that its demand can ramp up to around about 500 million tonnes per annum in the next 30 years. This chart shows estimates of the cost of production of clean hydrogen published over the past couple of years by 4 credible organisations: Australia's CSIRO, the International Energy Agency, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and the Hydrogen Council. A bit of caution should be taken with these numbers, of course. The underlying assumptions for these estimates vary. For example, they've assumed slightly different capacity factors and fuel costs, so they're not actually strictly directly comparable. However, it's pretty clear that there is generally good agreement on the cost of fossil production pathways with CCS, and this is not surprising, of course, because fossil production of hydrogen with CCS is decades old, and the current costs are actually pretty well understood. The variability, far greater variability that we see within these 4 studies in the cost of production of renewable hydrogen is due mainly to variations in assumed capacity factors of the renewable power generation, which impacts, of course, the price of power and the capacity factor for the electrolyzers. Of course, these are generic studies. The actual cost of production in any location will always be site specific. But it's clear that clean hydrogen produced by steam methane reformation or coal gasification with carbon capture and storage appears to be the lowest cost clean hydrogen production pathway today. Next slide, please, Julio. Another critical factor, of course, is the absence of constraints that would prevent production at the necessary scale. So these charts compare the primary resources required to produce 1.76 million tonnes of blue hydrogen, which is the annual production of the proposed Asian Renewable Energy Hub project in Northwest Australia, a very, very large project. All 3 production pathways have similar water requirements. The fossil pathways obviously require coal or gas, but these amounts are small compared to coal or gas resources available. The significant differentiating factors between blue and green hydrogen are the requirements for electricity and land. So to use the Asian Renewable Energy Hub project as an example, it will use 97 terawatt hours of electricity generated by renewable generation covering 5,750 square kilometres of land to produce the same quantity of clean hydrogen from coal or gas with CCS would require somewhere between 3 and 7 terawatt hours of power, and perhaps as much as 17 square kilometres of land, assuming a 500 kilometre long pipeline to transport the carbon dioxide to the injection site. So the availability of these resources, coal, gas, water, renewable energy resources, and land will determine which option is the best option in any location. In some locations, it'll be renewable. In other locations, it'll be blue hydrogen. Next slide, please, Julio. Of course, there is one other additional primary resource that I didn't mention, and that is pore space for the geological storage of carbon dioxide required for the production of blue hydrogen. So the chart on the left shows the amount of carbon dioxide requiring permanent geological storage in millions of tonnes from the production of one Asian Renewable Energy Hub worth of blue hydrogen, or 1.76 million tonnes of blue hydrogen from coal or gas. The map on the right shows the estimated global carbon dioxide geological storage capacity in billions of tons of carbon dioxide. The global carbon dioxide storage capacity is certainly more than sufficient for CCS to play its full role under any emissions abatement scenario, and that is for all applications of CCS in all industries, including blue hydrogen production. But just considering hydrogen production, if you assume an extreme hypothetical case where all 530 million tons of clean hydrogen is blue hydrogen, the annual storage requirement would be about 7.6 billion tons. And this compares to a global storage capacity measured in thousands of billions of tons. Next slide, please, Julia. Finally, consider the opposite extreme hypothetical case where all 530 million tons of clean hydrogen is green hydrogen. This would require about 29,000 terawatt hours of renewable or nuclear power, which is more than the total global electricity generation in 2018 from all sources. That quantity of near zero emissions electricity, if dispatchable, could theoretically completely replace all fossil generation capacity, resulting in a global zero emissions electricity system, at least at point of generation. So this raises the obvious question as to whether green hydrogen production is the best use of enormous amounts of near zero emissions energy. So this chart compares the emissions abatement achieved by renewable electricity to produce hydrogen, which then displaces combustion of natural gas, to the emissions abatement achieved if that same quantity of renewable electricity is fed directly into a power grid, displacing fossil generation. It shows that about 3 times as much abatement is delivered if the renewable electricity is used directly as electricity to displace natural gas combined cycle generation, and if it's displacing lignite generation, such as occurs in Germany, you would deliver over 8 times as much abatement using that renewable power directly as power in the grid. Of course, there will be many situations like at NEOM in Saudi Arabia, ARE in the northwest of Australia, and as we just heard previously in Chile, where there are fantastic renewable energy resources and little opportunity to use all of that energy in the grid. But generally speaking, whenever there is a significant grid nearby that includes fossil generation, renewable power should be used there first to displace fossil generation, because that's where it will deliver the greatest emissions abatement. I'll hand back to you now. Thank you, Julio.
Thank you, Alex. And that was really marvelous. We're now going to talk about hydrogen made with zero carbon electricity and electrolysis. As we said at the beginning, the costs and the footprint vary a lot by technology and by market. We did a set of analyses looking at different grid mixes, and even within a given grid, there's quite a range in terms of the carbon intensity, say between 10 tons and 25 tons of carbon emitted for every ton of hydrogen produced. And we looked at different technologies, alkaline versus PEM. Of course, if you used 100% renewable electricity, that's a much, much smaller number. We compared the grids of the United States, Europe, and Asia. In looking at these different technologies, we also compared how the energy was supplied, solar versus wind, as well as the technology base. These are the prices today. This is assuming electrolyzer prices on the order of $1,000 and the grid average prices associated with firm zero carbon electricity. This, of course, varies quite a lot locally, but these are the prices today, and we did these for in Asia, China, India, and Japan, taking the averages of those systems. The fact that the prices are high today is not a surprise. In the US, they're on the order of $8 or $9. In Europe, they're on the order of 10 to $12 a kilogram. But of course, these numbers are going down very fast. As Minister Jobet said, we are seeing profound reductions in renewable costs and profound reductions in electrolyzer costs. To understand these better, we did a Monte Carlo analysis looking at 12,000 simulations per case, in which we looked at different learning rates, we looked at different speeds of grid decarbonization, different costs of renewable reduction, all of these different things to try to understand what future costs look like in 2030. And the same cases, US grid, US renewable, European grid, European renewable, and China, India, Japan grid and renewable feeds. The main thing I want you to understand is that there is a tremendous range. It could be as cheap as $2 a kilogram or as high as $12 a kilogram in the US, depending on where you were. Or same thing in Europe, it could be as low as $3, as high as 12. And that means that in 2030, there will be a bunch of places that are cheap and you can go today, and other places where they'll simply be very expensive. This is the range of estimated costs. And again, that range is large. In some places, it will be prohibitively expensive. In other places, it will be close to market. But there's another important finding from this. If you look at the costs of a grid average versus renewables, renewables become cheap enough that, in fact, in most markets, a pure renewable feed is cheaper than the grid feed. And that's an important finding because it has implications for how green hydrogen will enter the market. In the US, the market is averaged about 4. In Europe, about 6. In Asian markets, around 7. That's pretty expensive, but again, there's a lot of range in there. The cost may be cheaper in 2025. They may not be cheaper until 2040, but it is also the case that at some point, the green hydrogen will be cheaper in most markets. There's a second issue which we looked at, which is infrastructure. It is not just the transmission, it's not just the electrolyzer project costs. We have to build out the power systems and build out the transmission lines. Often the transmission lines are a substantial additional cost to the system cost. And it's important to know what that looks like. We used the scenarios from the International Energy Agency, in which they basically had 88 million tons a year in 2030 and 530 in 2050. Those are for a 2-degree warming scenario. The costs associated with the build out of the electricity are really remarkable. Even for 2050, just the transmission costs, you're looking at trillions of dollars of costs. And of course, this is even with the forecast price reductions in electrolyzers and with renewables. So this includes the cost reductions that we're going to see in the years to come. By comparison, if you tried to do the entire volume with blue hydrogen, the CO2 transportation systems are cheaper. The thing that I want to leave you with, though, is really we shouldn't forge this axis of contention. You get cheaper and more robust solutions when you integrate them. We looked at a set of scenarios that were 70% green, 30% blue, and in fact, you can either get substantial cost reductions on the order of trillions of dollars, or you can get substantial speed. You could get much more production, 750 million tons a year, which is consistent with a 1.5-degree scenario for the same price as you would for a green system with a much smaller volume. All you got to do is mix them together. As I say now and into the future, it is helpful to cultivate an aqua culture. Another important thing to know is that green hydrogen invites a shift in the fuel production landscape. A whole bunch of new players come on board. It's not just Texas and the Middle East, which have terrific oil production. There's a whole new landscape that comes on. Some of them are, in fact, petroleum-rich regions like Texas and the Middle East. But places like Chile, Namibia, Northwest Australia, Iceland, the Pacific Northwest, places with terrific wind resources like Patagonia or the North Sea, all of these become places where hydrogen can be made at relatively low cost. And you need that combination of high capacity factor and low cost to get to that $2 a kilogram magic threshold. There is a challenge in that those sources of hydrogen production for cheap green hydrogen in the future are not located where we currently have hydrogen demand, places like the Gulf of Mexico, Southeast Asia, or Japan. This means, again, we will be shipping, and fuels like ammonia become an important part of a future hydrogen economy. Last but not least, we want to talk about the policy landscape. This is changing very quickly. I could spend another half an hour on this. Thankfully, I don't have to. We have an extraordinary panel of experts that will be talking about the policies that they see in their regions. But it's not just the Biden team in the US, and it's not just the UK or the EU. All over the world, Chile, Australia, the Gulf states, Canada, Korea, Southeast Asia, Singapore, all of these countries are beginning to formulate hydrogen-related policies. In that context, we have a small set of recommendations. First, start with analysis, learn some stuff. Go out there and assess the existing infrastructure in detail. Figure out how you need to plus it up in a way that suits your region. Estimate the cost for that so that you can pay for it. And again, you're going to do some blue, you're going to do some green. In some regions, all blue, in other regions, all green. You still got to do the analysis and understand this. we would strongly recommend engaging local communities now. These are going to be big projects, and understanding local constituencies and frontline communities, in particular, traditionally disadvantaged communities, is extremely important. Today, mostly we are proceeding with bilateral agreements. That's helpful. Such analysis can help you formulate what bilateral agreements will be most valuable for each nation. With respect to the infrastructure, I mentioned that before, we're going to start building transmission lines and electrolyzers. We're going to start building CO2 pipelines and dedicated storage, green and blue, both. We specifically recommend, though, a focus on ports. Ports is where a lot of the industrial use case is. It's a lot of where heavy-duty transportation is. It's certainly where shipping is. It's certainly where you could receive these fuels or send these fuels. And they have specific needs in terms of infrastructure and retrofits in order to succeed in entering a hydrogen economy. It's important to create market aligning incentives. The focus should be, again, on low carbon. On the production side, a lot of different things. Tax credits, grants, contracts for differences like the UK, feed-in tariffs like in Europe, some kind of revenue enhancement is a way to start making the molecules and getting into the business. On the use side, perhaps swapping engines and getting away from combustion engines and into fuel cells. Perhaps providing subsidies for the use of hydrogen, say in heavy industry like steel or chemicals. Support manufacturing for things like fuel cells that will enhance and speed the use of hydrogen deployment. From a macro political perspective, standards matter. Today, we should start setting the life cycle analysis, LCA standards, by which hydrogen is measured, so that everyone is using the same metrics and the same yardsticks around the world. Groups like the International Standards Organization are very helpful for that. In particular, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, can make a lot of progress in setting the standards for shipping fuels and safety in a way that we can ensure that a hydrogen economy will not create additional problems. Finally, we will eventually move away from bilateral agreements, ideally towards sectoral agreements, say within the steel sector or the chemical sector or shipping sector, as a way to get standards and trade moving forward quickly. Eventually, we will end up in a commodity market, the way that LNG is today and the way that oil is today. Those kinds of agreements began as bilateral agreements and then moved to sectoral and commodity agreements. We imagine the same thing will happen here, and we encourage governments around the world to get into that business. They'll have a chance to do so this Thursday at the Earth Day Summit hosted by President Biden. I could spend a lot more time learning from you and talking to you, but instead, I simply want to thank you for your attention and look forward to the comments from our panel. Thank you very much. One last word, we did put the link to the reports into the chat function. You should have that and look forward to you looking at our pages.
Thank you, Julio and Alex. Really appreciate the presentation following our keynote remarks, including your comments about the critical nature of the next decade. I think it's a really important point to say, what do we need to do in the next decade if we want to keep global average temperature rise to anywhere close to the goals that we set forth in the Paris Agreement? So thank you for those comments, as well as the term aqua hydrogen. Julio, I think I'm going to have to borrow that one. That's the first time I've heard that one from you, so appreciate it. So we're now going to move on to comments from other members of our panel here, before moving ahead to a moderated discussion and then questions from the audience. So first, I'm going to pass over the baton or the microphone over to Nobuo Tanaka. Tanaka-san, we welcome your remarks.
Thank you very much, Marisa, and thank you very much for inviting me, Julio, for this very interesting subject of hydrogen. When I was executive director of the IEA in Paris, it was the year 2011, we announced that the golden age of natural gas is coming. It's 10 years ago. Because of the shale revolution, the gas price is getting cheaper, and it is a really good commodity to replace coal. And the United States succeeded in reducing emission, CO2 emission, by replacing coal by shale gas. And what I'm going to say now is maybe the golden age of hydrogen coming. And what we are observing now is the huge change in the demand side. The structures of the mega tech companies are asking all the supply chain companies to do the same for renewable energy 100% or carbon neutral by 2030. So they are moving much faster than governments. Government announced the carbon neutrality by 2050, but these corporations announced by 2030 even. So the demand side is really pressing everybody moving quicker into that direction. Japan started hydrogen economy discussion by the Toyota's fuel cell vehicle Mirai in 2014. So we tried to make the hydrogen refueling station from to the 130 or maybe to 800 by 2030. So this was the target, but it didn't move so fast because Mirai is a passenger vehicle. We should have aimed at more the heavy duty trucks or buses or commercial fleets instead of the passenger vehicle. And also industrial application. IEA always say that hard to abate sector is where the hydrogen should be applied for decarbonizing the sectors. And just as you mentioned about steel sector, cement, or coal power could be very important. In fact, one of the big breakthrough in Japan after the announcement of the Prime Minister Suga last year for this carbon neutrality by 2050, the green growth strategy was revealed by METI, and using ammonia for the fuel is the key. JERA, the largest thermal power company in Japan and the largest procurer of the LNG in the world, announced that they will use 20% of ammonia in their coal power plant. And this makes a huge difference when all other coal power is going to use for their current facility, because Asian economies has quite a big amount of infrastructure which already exists, and depleting it takes years and years or decades. So using hydrogen or ammonia, green ammonia or blue ammonia or green hydrogen or blue hydrogen will help to reduce carbon emission by using the existing infrastructure. This is the key elements of utilizing LNG, utilizing hydrogen. Japan started LNG business 50 years ago by importing natural gas liquefaction from Alaska 50 years ago. Now we are moving toward hydrogen or ammonia. So by using the three different methods of transportation, first is the liquefaction. Australia is doing the liquefaction of the green hydrogen from Australia to Japan, and ammonia from Saudi Arabia, the green or blue hydrogen through ammonia from Saudi Arabia to Japan, or methyl cyclohexane, that is a chemical hydrate, which is Brunei started exporting some to Japan as a testing. Singapore is interesting to be the hub of MCH in the future. So with this transportation and storage technology, maybe the scaling up of trade and commoditization of the hydrogen may happen. So we have to reduce cost for whole value chain of hydrogen, from production, CCS, or transportation and storage. And probably IEA was started to create a joint strategic stockpile of oil in 1974, but now maybe moving toward storage of hydrogen by, for example, MCH is possible, or some other way to use the hydrogen as a very important security stockpile even in the future. So my point is that, yes, hydrogen helps to decarbonizing Asia and growing Asia, and also for those demand side users to decarbonize, and we have to work closely together. And this report is fascinating. The policy recommendation is really helpful, and I really support and endorse this report for your summit meeting coming to the end of this week. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. Second, I'm going to pass things over to Dr. Fiona Simon. Dr. Simon, over to you.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. So I'm the CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council, which is the peak body for the emerging hydrogen industry in Australia. And we've got members from all the different sectors, the wonderful versatility of hydrogen, which means that you're talking across different forms of energy, transport, all the forms of transport, and then getting into the technology side of things. So it's very interesting, and we do see the versatility of hydrogen across our membership. The enthusiasm for hydrogen in Australia is huge. We have a national hydrogen strategy, which came out in November 2019. And that has suggested that our Australian hydrogen industry could generate about 8,000 jobs and $11 billion in GDP by 2050. And that wasn't even the most ambitious scenario. There's an objective for our strategy to have Australia be a top 3 exporter to Asian markets by 2030. There's been significant funding announced, although we would always argue we need more. And there were even reports this morning that the Australian government will invest an additional $275 million Australian to accelerate the development of our industry. And we're developing hubs, so that's a big focus for us in Australia. It's the co-location of different uses with production and trying to get efficiencies of scale and scope. Our states and our territories are highly engaged. They were part of that national hydrogen strategy. We actually had 9 different governments agreeing to 57 agreements, which is a pretty impressive political achievement. We've got about $200 million in funding from the states and territories as well. The industry's engaged. We've got over 60 projects around the country in various states of development. And I recommend for anyone who's interested to see the state of play in Australia for both the policies and the projects. There's a website to look at called High Resource, with the inevitable HY for High Resource, which is hosted on the website of our CSIRO, our Commonwealth Scientific Agency. In terms of what we do at AHC, we connect everyone in the hydrogen space. And for us, it's about policy. So that links to what we've heard from previous speakers. We need policy settings to establish the industry because it doesn't exist yet in its future form. We frame how we talk about everything as the basic licenses to operate, nothing hugely remarkable there. So economic license, we need to get to scale. The regulatory license, we need the industry to have stable, meaningful and efficient regulatory settings. And that's everything from obviously technical and safety standards through to the skills and training required. It's changing things like legislative definitions of what is natural gas in order to know what we can put through our pipelines. It's developing market design mechanisms that actually help value hydrogen as against the incumbents. So, and there's also certification, which is something which a lot of people are talking about globally. It's how do we know that, or how does a consumer of hydrogen know when they've imported it from overseas, how that hydrogen was made? So these are all the things which are occupying us at the moment. And social license also can't be underestimated, as we've also heard today. We need trusted community and consumer relationships. This is going to be an enormous, like moving to net zero more broadly, it's going to involve an enormous culture shift, a need to bring people along, a need to have communities hosting projects in their midst, the sheer scale of renewable electricity infrastructure that's required to move to electrifying the economy. The transition is going to be big, and we really need to make sure that we're engaging well with society. So we are also working in Australia in engagement approaches, communications and information for a range of purposes. And we've got our work cut out for us, because collectively the task ahead to develop the foundations for this industry are significant. The need to connect the dots is very real. But it's so important because for Australia in particular, the hydrogen industry shows such promise. We've got the land mass, the solar penetration to create green hydrogen at scale. We've got experience, oil and gas export, renewable energy. We've intellectual resources. We've got a comprehensive hydrogen research program, and we're seeing that develop across the country. Australia has strong economic growth. There's a safe and low risk environment to invest and do business. So we see it as being a matter not of if Australia becomes a global hydrogen powerhouse, but how and by when. So yeah, we're really excited because we're at this defining point in history, aren't we? Where countries like Australia and the US, Chile, really globally, we can choose to use the opportunity to decarbonise our energy use through building the infrastructure for hydrogen production and use. And we also have the chance to boost our resilience to economic and environmental shocks through using clean and green hydrogen in the energy mix. But I'll stop there, and I look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I appreciate that. And third, I'm pleased to welcome comments from Benedict Chia. Benedict, over to you.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So I'm Benedict. I'm from the National Climate Change Secretariat in Singapore. We sit within the Prime Minister's office, and our role is really to work with both external and domestic stakeholders in Singapore to move and advance the climate agenda. We see ourselves as a central policy unit on climate change in Singapore. So a little bit of background for those of you who are less familiar with Singapore. We are a small, low-lying island state in Southeast Asia, just about where the equator is. In terms of size, we are actually slightly smaller than New York City as a form of comparison. And that also makes us, because we are low-lying and small, vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. For us, it's an existential challenge. And if we're not able to address the impacts of climate change effectively, it could affect Singapore's economic well-being and viability. And because climate change is an existential issue for us, we take the role that we play in terms of reducing emissions very seriously. We are working towards net zero as soon as possible. And one of the key pillars which we see as critically important to help us get to net zero is the role of emerging technologies like carbon capture, utilization, storage, as well as low carbon hydrogen. In fact, we see both technology options as being fairly closely related. I think as you have seen from the earlier presentations today, that low carbon hydrogen also includes potentially blue hydrogen. And for us to make blue hydrogen work, you actually need the CCS option to be activated. On the CCUS front, there are a couple of routes to utilization of CCS, which includes using the captured carbon to produce fuel. And many of these routes actually require hydrogen. So those are really examples to show how actually CCUS and hydrogen are actually very closely related together. In Singapore itself, we see a few potential areas where we think low carbon hydrogen could play a role. One of which is our maritime hub. So we are one of the largest maritime hub in the region. And one of the key, we think the key enablers to actually supporting greater use of hydrogen is scale. So within maritime itself, there are very, very few large players. And if we are able to get them to adopt hydrogen through a hub like Singapore, it could potentially support greater scale up. We also see ourselves playing a bigger role in terms of whether we can be a hydrogen hub for the region, both in terms of importing and exporting and using hydrogen. The other two areas where we see potential for hydrogen in Singapore is in the power sector. So Singapore, one of the unique things about our power sector is that more than 95% of power is generated from natural gas, which is the cleanest form of fossil fuel, but it's a sector that we need to see how we can further decarbonize. And with a mainly natural gas generated fuel mix, actually it gives us the scope to blend hydrogen. Many of the current natural gas generation sets actually are able to tolerate a small percentage of hydrogen blend. The numbers we have heard range from about 10 to 30%. And newer generation sets that are coming online, according to the manufacturers, they are manufacturing them to be able to tolerate an even bigger, even larger percentage share itself. The other sector where we think hydrogen could play a role in Singapore is our petrochemical sector. So again, we're one of the largest petrochemicals hub within Asia itself. And currently right now, petrochemicals, especially if you're looking at production of specialty, number of the specialty chemical routes actually require hydrogen as a feedstock itself, as a feedstock input, which also means that within the sector, it actually already has, in a sense, the infrastructure, the know-how, the safety protocols to handle and to use hydrogen. So if you're able to replace some of these sources of hydrogen, which most of them currently right now are produced from gray or brown sources, with a low carbon source like green or blue, it would definitely help reduce emissions. So apart from these use cases, there are two more things that we are doing to help advance the use of hydrogen. So we are signing MOUs, Memorandum of Understandings, with countries around the world who are also interested in this space. We have already concluded MOUs with Australia and Chile. And I'd say the Australian MOU is a unique MOU because it's, I think, one of the first few MOUs that we concluded almost virtually. So it was concluded last year in the peak of the COVID pandemic itself. We started talking about it quite seriously in the early part of the year, and then we managed to conclude it in the later part of the year. Though even with all these travel restrictions, we also did something similar with Chile as well. The other thing that we are doing quite seriously in Singapore is we are putting aside funding resources for low carbon energy research. And this would include hydrogen as well as CCUS. The aim of these research proposals is to really drive down the cost of deployment for hydrogen in Singapore, as well as to advance some of the lower TRL technologies that we think could potentially play a significant role. So, I mean, I end by concluding that we recognize that hydrogen is a very promising lever that can help the world decarbonize. Singapore is interested. We're looking for partners out there, companies, countries, to work together to make this a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benedict, and thank you to everyone else for your comments. So we're now going to move into a moderated discussion. So for those of you watching online, again, my name is Melissa Lott, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Center on Global Energy Policy, and I'm joined by a really great panel for the following discussion. And we're going to be talking through the future of hydrogen. For those who haven't already submitted your questions online via Zoom, I'd encourage you to do so now. You can submit that via the Q&A function. For those who have, we have many dozen questions, so I really appreciate the enthusiasm for the topic. And as always, the challenge will be to see which questions can we get to during this discussion, and we'll have to do some more events on this, Julio. I think that is in our future. So again, thanks to everyone. I'm going to quickly kick off the discussion with a few questions. Julio and Alex, in your presentation, you mentioned infrastructure costs and limits, and I wondered if you could comment on the role of critical infrastructure in scaling up of hydrogen, and then if anyone else on the panel would like to contribute with comments about the critical nature of infrastructure and, you know, how we need it and where we need it to be able to scale up hydrogen production, distribution, and use. So I'll start with Julio or Alex. Which one of you would like to take that first?
I'll be brief, but first. Basically, if we want to create a just, verdant world and hit our 2.5 or 1.5 degree targets, every week is infrastructure week for the next 50 years. We just need to build stuff. And as we said, we think that there's, in the case of hydrogen, port infrastructure is particularly valuable. But in fact, any of the infrastructure, CO2 capture and transportation and storage infrastructure, electricity transmission infrastructure, ammonia storage and synthesis infrastructure, transmission power lines, it's all important. And we will not be able to scale these things up without those infrastructure additions.
Absolutely. I'd like to endorse what Julio just said and add the fact that, in fact, you can deliver some significant economies of scale and reduce the cost of production by building large-scale infrastructure, particularly around, for example, CCS hubs, where you are dealing with much larger volumes of CO2 from multiple sources. And sharing the cost of the infrastructure required to transport and store and compress that CO2 across many more tons. So infrastructure is not only absolutely necessary, but if you're clever in the way that you plan it and construct it around hubs, it can actually play a significant role in reducing the unit cost of production.
Many thanks. And Benedict, I see your hand up. So did you want to comment? And then Tanaka-san, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, yes. I wanted to comment on the issue of infrastructure, because and this actually touches on, I think, a critical point which came up in one of the earlier presentations, that if you look at the cost of producing hydrogen, the projections is that it could go below $2. In fact, some of the more aggressive projections show that it may even go as low as $1 itself. But the landed cost of hydrogen after you have done the conversions and after you have transported it is actually quite high. It more or less doubles and in some cases triples if you compare landed cost versus production cost itself. And I think this is critical because in one of the slides shown earlier, the main supply sources of hydrogen tend to be located away from where hydrogen is actually being demanded itself. So actually, in terms of infrastructure, one of the key pieces that we think we need to work on quite aggressively is how can we bring down this cost? How can we bring down the cost of conversion? How can we bring down the cost of transporting hydrogen over in some cases thousands of kilometers. Because if it and when we think about infrastructure, I think the angle to it is not just building current infrastructure, but also rethinking, is there a way we can rethink how hydrogen is actually being converted and transported right now in order to reduce the cost? Because if we don't reduce the cost, I think it's going to be incredibly challenging for us to support greater adoption of hydrogen itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Benedict. And Tanaka-san, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, as Julio said, the IEA revealed a kind of analysis about how big investment is necessary to achieve net zero emission by 2050. And solar park should be built. The largest current solar park should be built every 2 days. And electrolyzer, the largest operating one in Fukushima, should be built every hour until 2050. And the CCS facility like Northern Light project should happen every week. So this kind of huge investment is necessary to scale down the costs of infrastructure. And let's think about the analogy of the shale gas revolution. The shale gas revolution happens not everywhere in the world, but in the United States, in North America, because of the very high oil price helps the associated gas production and supply through the existing pipeline. So these two elements, of course, the fracking is a very important technological breakthrough, but without these infrastructure was high prices of oil, it doesn't happen in the other part of the world. So for the same thing, the golden age of hydrogen must happen by the very high carbon prices. Probably carbon price or carbon tax is necessary to stimulate the demand of hydrogen. And the transportation or using the current pipeline by mixing the hydrogen to the natural gas, or building the grid lines as such, and with this value chain or transportation of the infrastructure is the key element of the success of the hydrogen economy in the future. And this, yes, the very strong commitment for green or blue hydrogen or whatever the hydrogen is necessary, and any country which we have seen these days should invest and commit to the future of this element. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments. Something that you're saying will lead me to my next question, which Fiona, I was going to start with you first, which, we've spoken a bit about, policies and creating the environments that we need to actually support the buildup of the future that we're looking at for this industry. I wonder if you could comment on kind of the most important market aligning policies and the most important levers that we can be pulling to actually set up an environment in which we can achieve the future that we may want to see for these technologies.
Thanks, Melissa. I don't know I can answer the most important, because at different points through different lenses, everything is so important. And in fact, I think that's at the heart of our problem. If we say there's a problem, it's even just working out where to start. It's, we've got the big indigestible elephant. We need to start eating. Where do we even start? So look, for us, there's definitely technology improvements that would then help efficiencies in the economics of what we do with hydrogen, everything from the production through to the various ways of understanding how we transport and store it, and through to the users. That's real, and people are dealing and grappling with that. However, the basic technologies are not new. A lot of what we're dealing with is an economic gap. It's the investment gap, because the industry can't create itself at a loss. There's this fundamental policy role to create the foundation for the industry to even exist. And through different lenses, different things are the key priority. But if I look at it from an industry perspective, where everything kind of gets seen through the economic lens, it's the policies that go to, and this is something we talked about before, it's things like carbon pricing, it's emission standards on vehicles, if you're looking at it from a transport lens. It's blending targets. So in Australia, we're talking about blending hydrogen into the natural gas networks. And the more that you can, the more that governments come in and say, that you shall get to 10% and it shall be done by this time, again, we start to create some sense, at least, of certainty for investors. In Australia, it's about things like now, actually committing to a net zero target. It's about all the different ways that we can start to narrow that investment gap through policy, making hydrogen, the more appealing option than it is right now. It's taxation settings. So I'd say all of these things have a role to play. There's a cumulative effect that we would hope to have across all the different ways that you can address closing that economic gap through policy. And I would also say that, and regulation is fundamental in that, because regulation is about market design, and it's also about creating that confidence that you then get the social license up. Regulations also, it's about making sure that we've all got some clear expectations of one another in an industry. So for us, it's just, we need to be seeing all of these levers as things that can be pulled, and then working to get a cumulative effect, which is enough to get us over the line.
And so I'm wondering if I could do a follow-up question to that, which is, if we do have this cumulative effect and we talk about the next decade being critical, what do things look like in about 10 years? If we do, pull all the levers and have some kind of cumulative effect, and if we're building momentum, where might we expect to be in 10 years? And do you see the kind of growth that is forecast by organizations like the IEA and others in their scenarios, as we kind of discussed and touched on earlier? And Julio, I'm going to pass it to you first, just because I think you were touching on some of these issues, but where might we hope to be or expect to be in 10 years? And take that as you want there.
Right. I certainly hope that we are doing better than the IEA curves. I hope that we're on the order of 100 million tons of clean hydrogen every year, and that is being used to displace emissions in the most hard to abate systems, in things like steel production, chemicals, shipping, these sorts of things. Really, these are not so much technology limits as they are policy limits. We need the market aligning policies to get the molecules made. And in a really important topic, we need standards. Things like the International Maritime Organization standards, the carbon life cycle accounting standards, procurement standards by governments. These could go a very long way to speeding the transition into markets.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we do have time for questions from the audience, of which, I mean, I think we're about to cross 100 different questions, which I think may be a record for one of these events, or at least of the ones I can remember lately. So well done, audience. Let's see how many we can get. So hands together, here we go. We're going to start with that around standards. So some of the questions that are being asked are around, how do we allay the fears of potential stakeholders around the deployment of hydrogen? How do we set up safeguards to make sure that the use of hydrogen is actually done in a safe manner, safe for people in the ambient environments around wherever we are using hydrogen, but also in the shipping and movement of hydrogen? I think that grabs together maybe 3 or 4 of these questions that we have in the queue. So with that, I might pass it over to Benedict first, and then maybe to Alex as we comment. But if anybody else on the panel would like to answer, please raise your hand or just let me know in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So I agree. Standards are absolutely critical. And I think there are 2 sets of standards that we are talking about here. One is the safety standards, especially if you start looking at the use of hydrogen for more in more dispersed and in more domestic type settings. For industrial settings, it's a little bit less challenging because you're dealing with a smaller number of players, and in a sense, it's a little bit more centralized. But I think notwithstanding that, it's important to be clear how do we address some of the safety concerns with regard to transporting, shipping hydrogen, especially moving it around very dense settings. So in Singapore, because we are a small, dense city state, even if you're looking at industrial users, industry is not located too far away from some of our residential and some of our commercial areas itself. So having that set of standards in place, I think it's important. And it's important to provide the assurance as well. The other set of standards which is quite critical, especially as we are talking about addressing climate change, is the standards surrounding life cycle carbon emissions itself. So there's a lot of talk about blue carbon. There's a lot of talk about blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. Should it be blue or should it be green? Which should we be favoring itself? I think our current approach, which we're thinking about, is in a sense to adopt a more technology neutral approach. So define what we think is a certain benchmark or standard in terms of hydrogen production, use, shipping, and whatnot. We put a number to it. And then anything below that number would be defined as low carbon hydrogen itself, instead of trying to go down a route of identifying whether blue is better or green is better. Because ultimately, if you look at the world, our climate, the atmosphere doesn't really, it's colorblind. It isn't able to see blue and green. It only recognizes emissions that goes into the atmosphere and the impact that it has on humans itself. So I think that's something that we are hoping to do. It's something that could potentially be started bilaterally, but actually it's quite important that we get either broad sectors or global agreement in terms of what that standard should actually be. And I think that is absolutely important in getting public acceptance or getting international recognition that the use of hydrogen does not actually worsen the climate challenge that we are trying to address. Thanks.
Thank you, Benedict. And I think this is going to be an active answer session here. So Julio, I saw a quick two finger. If you want that, go for it. Then Alex and then Tanaka-san, please.
But my two finger is what Benedict just said is even more true for biohydrogen. Because the land use issues could be really terrible if you do it poorly, but if you do it well, biohydrogen with CCS could be deeply carbon restorative. Those standards are going to make all the difference. And in fact, buying nations like the UK and Japan have a big role in determining those standards.
Thank you. So Alex,
absolutely agree. Absolutely agree with all of those comments, all very, very valid. I'd like to add to them, though, that I think government has a significant role here in putting in place some public education programs to identify exactly what it is that specific communities and the public are concerned about. I think we know what they are, but we shouldn't make that assumption necessarily. We should ask. And then putting in place programs to do two things. Firstly, to identify the opportunity that hydrogen provides with respect to economic growth, with respect to emissions abatement, most importantly. And then secondly, to one by one respond to those concerns and describe how those issues, how those risks can be appropriately mitigated. So one, demonstrate it's important and why hydrogen needs to be pursued. And secondly, discuss and identify how the risks and concerns that have been identified can be allayed.
Thank you, Alex. Tanaka-san.
Thanks. Well, just 2 points. One is just as Ben explained about the domestic safety regulations, Japan experienced of hydrogen refueling station for fuel cell vehicle, and safety standards for this kind of station is very much different from industrial use. The huge volume of industrial use should be different. So there's no regulation as such. So the regulatory reform is always inevitable, and very quick, let's say, reform is necessary for the deployment of hydrogen. And also the second part is this international harmonization of standard for much freer trade of hydrogen. Europe is moving towards so-called green taxonomy of sustainability. And if some other country is not abiding by their standard, they will put the border adjustment measures or tariffs. So definitely international collaboration or harmonization of what is clean hydrogen, or blue or gray or green, there should be some kind of understanding, and we have to quickly start this kind of harmonization of standards. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Fiona, you have a comment on this?
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that it may be that those watching this event might think that with the way that we're all talking, that work isn't happening in these areas. And so I just wanted to give people some comfort that work is occurring. So for example, if we look at certification or guarantee of origin, however we'd like to talk about it, that may vary from country to country. There's actually the work, I think it's 22 countries through the IPHE that's going on, and they're looking at the European model of a scheme called Certify, that again has to have the HY at the end. And that's about being able to develop, what we're all trying to do, the many countries through the IPHE, is develop a carbon accounting methodology, which can then be taken on by countries in different ways to then turn into more of a sort of a certification process, so that again, there's that consistency, and particularly from Australian perspective, because the export is so important. We want to make sure that the countries who are buying our hydrogen are comfortable in doing so, because they are receiving the hydrogen that they thought they were signing up for, given that there are these different types which, yes, don't have an active colour, but we are talking in this sort of colloquial sense around blue and green. So that there is work going on in all of these areas, and I think the challenge that we continue to confront is putting the pieces together and connecting the dots, because it's actually just hugely complex. And it's not that people aren't thinking about the issues, it's that when everyone's thinking about the issues, they might be thinking no one else is. And then it's a matter of bringing parties together and then saying, all right, so where's the gap now? And that's been just a huge challenge for us. In fact, I've spent most of this last year and a half doing more inclusion and facilitating and bringing parties together to discover that it's not that no one's thought about the issues or made any progress. It's about how do we get some efficiencies as we all grapple with the same things. And so we're really keen to collaborate with other industry associations, other countries, and it's across all those areas. The same, we're looking at a consumer and community education program that's a piece of work that's being led in Australia by one of our governments for the National Hydrogen Strategy. There's so many people who are engaged in this space, and we're the AHC are bringing parties together. But it would be good for us all then to be able to use what others have developed previously and to try to get some efficiencies as we deal with this enormous policy task.
And I think the questions in the chat, in the Q&A rather, they certainly highlight that importance of saying, how do we actually say, is this green or blue, and how much does it matter given my goals, given whatever they are, and how can I make sure, to earlier comments that were made, that there's some process for saying this is what I'm getting and this is how it can actually contribute to the ends that I care about. And as you said, Fiona, many people are thinking about this and how we can do it consistently in order to achieve future success on this. So I wanted to come around to a couple of different questions that are about creating markets, kind of which comes first. Is it industry and these large users, Tanaka-san, as you said? Is it transportation? Is it power generation with the blending of 20%, hydrogen into coal facilities, these types of things? So I wondered if folks could speak a bit about what your countries are doing in terms of creating markets and creating opportunities. And I think I'm particularly thinking about Japan and Singapore in this, actually, in my mind when I think about this question. So Tanaka-san and Benedict, do you mind if I pass it to the two of you, please, to just comment on country leadership in creating these markets and what might come first, second, third, fifth in that process? Yes, Tanaka-san, please, if you go first, and then Benedict. Well, thank you.
Yeah, definitely creating market could be initiated by governments. And Japan, in a case that Prime Minister Suga's announcement of carbon neutrality by 2050 made a huge industrial shock to everybody in Japan last year, because until that time, it was very much everybody was very skeptical of achieving 1.5 degrees Celsius containment toward the end of the century. How could we do that? But now, after his announcement, everybody's talking about decarbonization, and industry is moving toward that direction. So not only Japan started for concentrating in the transportation of the fuel cell vehicle by Toyota's Mirai, but now the target is everybody, is steel, cement, and power sector. As I said, the power sector changed very much of this JERA. JERA is a joint venture of Tokyo Electric and Chubu, and the biggest procurer of LNG in the world. And they said that they will mix ammonia 20% to the coal power plant, and eventually put hydrogen into the gas power and replacing everything with clean hydrogen. So this is a huge let's say, move toward the use of hydrogen in the power sector, but also it pushes other sector like steel. So demand side also makes a huge difference, because mega tech companies, Apple requests Renewable 100 for the all supply chain companies. So wherever you exist, if you want to have to sell to Apple, you have to be Renewable 100, and even by 2030. So this demand side driven transformation is probably much, much stronger. And that is the reason why IEA's, let's say, prospect is more or less government sponsored organization and government prospect of predictions. But demand side certainly exceeds that expectation and pushes the change much, much faster. That is my view. Thank you.
Thank you. And Benedict.
Yeah. So in terms of activating the demand side, we see it in a couple of stages itself. The first stage, which we think is absolutely important, is increasing awareness, identifying who our stakeholders are and working with them to understand how they can deploy hydrogen, what's the benefit of doing so. And towards this end, last year, we undertook a fairly detailed technical feasibility study on hydrogen deployment in Singapore. It's a study that looked across the entire value chain, starting with where could we potentially procure low hydrogen from, how exactly can that low hydrogen be transported to Singapore in its various forms. We talked about it briefly during this presentation, ammonia, MCH, liquefied hydrogen itself. What are the various pros and cons of each mode? And I think that mode of transportation is important, because different modes of transportation has different impacts and requirements in terms of infrastructure itself. The receiving infrastructure is going to be quite different. And then after that, where do we see are the potential end users? And I think, as mentioned earlier in my presentation, the promising sectors that we have looked at would be maritime, industry, specifically petrochemicals, as well as power generation. So this year-long exercise, which we did last year when we did this study, I think was important in terms of leveling up knowledge, creating the awareness of why it actually should be done and what could potentially be done itself. We are in the final stages of wrapping up this study itself, and we are now looking to see how we can move to the next phase. And the next phase, after increasing awareness, is really thinking about what are some potential demonstration test beds and pilots that could potentially be done. And in order for us to do that, I think we need to line up a few things. The first thing that we need to line up is our sources. Where exactly can we purchase or can we source low carbon hydrogen from? Which is why some of the discussions we're doing with a number of countries like Australia, Chile are important, because these potentially are sources in which we can source for hydrogen. The other piece is the demand side itself. Who are the early takers who are willing to move forward on this piece? So amongst the so it really means taking the first stage, which is identifying the promising sectors, to the next step, which are the specific companies who are willing to partner with us. The other two pieces, I think, in terms which are quite critical, one of which is funding itself. So the low carbon energy research funding initiative that we announced last year was an initial attempt at putting some resources on the table to help lubricate the process and get this going. We recognize that it is probably not going to be sufficient, because it's really in its early stages, and that once we can demonstrate the use case is feasible, we may potentially need further support in order to scale up. And I think the third area which we are also looking at quite closely, and which we have experienced in Singapore, is the regulatory sort of framework, especially around safety itself. And the way we have approached it is to take, in a sense, a sandbox type approach. So if we're able to identify a particular use case, a particular import point, can we draw a regulatory sandbox around it, which allows hydrogen to be used without regulations being fully fleshed out? And in fact, the experiences that we have in this regulatory sandbox could potentially help us draft the most business-friendly and the most appropriate regulation in the space itself. So those are the few pieces that we think needs to get in place. And then after the demonstration and the test bidding phase, we are actually thinking of how would that actually lead to more widespread deployment within Singapore itself. Yeah. So and I think this is the entire global value chain for hydrogen is still developing, which is why conversations that we have at this panel, as well as bilateral discussions we have with other players who are interested in this, is very useful in helping inform us in terms of how we can go about activating this space. Thanks.
Thank you both for those comments. And I know we need to sign off at this moment. I think, Julio, you had a quick two-finger. I'll give you the last very quick words, and then we'll sign off for the evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world.
Thank you. A very short two fingers. There's another thing that we need to deploy here, which is not talked about enough. We need more human beings. We do not have the scientists or engineers or regulators or business people yet working in this space, and we just simply need more. As part of that discussion, I want to remind people that hydrogen does not just provide zero carbon energy if done right. If done right, it also provides additional health effects. It reduces local pollution. It can create local wealth and jobs that are high paying and long lived. And so it's not just a question of cost and market entry. If we focus on the positives, there's an awful lot that we can do in a small amount of time.
Thank you for that last comment. Thank you again to our speakers for joining us today. Honestly, I wish that we just had another hour. This has been a real pleasure. And thank you for each of your comments as we have this discussion. And thank you to our audience for tuning in, the many, many hundreds of you who joined us today. As we mentioned, the full video recording of this event will be available on the Center on Global Energy Policy's website in the coming days. We encourage you to also save the date for our annual Columbia Global Energy Summit. This year's summit will be held virtually over the course of 3 days, including May 18th, 19th, and 20th. For a full calendar of our upcoming events, please visit our website. And we'll be putting that website here in the chat in a second. And we hope that you enjoy your evening or morning, whatever time it is where you are in the world. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.